Let's bring in Doug Herbert. First of all, let's talk about the hostages in a moment, because this is a major developing issue here. Let's first talk about what President Trump has been saying, his vision for what he wants to see at this forum.
Yeah, well, the forum itself, right? These are the two hosts of what is being billed as a conference for Mideast peace, nothing less. And we've heard Trump throughout the day in the past hours telling the Israeli parliament the age of terror is over. That's a quote from him. This is the dawn of a new Middle East. In a sense, Donald Trump has been, and this is something that is a signature part of who he is as a president, as a transactional president, sometimes being seen as putting the rhetoric before the reality. And what I mean by that is the rhetoric is that the war is over, right? And you could say that the rhetoric in itself, you might say, well, obviously, Doug, that flies in the face of the reality on the ground. The reality is that there's 1,000,001 obstacles remaining before we have any hope of a real, enduring, lasting Mideast peace. But what Trump does bring into this equation, and you could say does make this different from what we've seen in the past, even going back to the 1993 Oslo Accords, right? What's different here is this sense of Donald Trump's force of character. He sees himself as the world's best deal maker. And whatever you might think of his style, his diplomatic style, whether you want to give him credit or not give him credit, it is undeniable, because we hear it from leader after leader, that Donald Trump's presence in this process, his jet setting around the region, from Israel to Egypt, and saying things that seem to fly in the face of reality. It's if you will it, it will happen. So the force of Donald Trump's rhetoric, in a sense, is also a factor. You might say it's an intangible factor, Gavin, but it's a factor in this peace process. So whereas you might have, scholars and analysts of the Mideast and military analysts sitting around and saying, well, Gaza's completely devastated. The population has been in what, international food groups and organizations say is famine situation with widespread malnutrition. We still have a group called Hamas, which had just released hostages in this first phase, but is showing no signs of going quietly into the night. On the contrary, the recent reports in the past 24 hours or so say that Hamas is actually reasserting control in areas right now from which the Israeli army has already pulled back, and rounding up so-called collaborators. That is sort of asserting a law unto itself already in Gaza. So you have that reality there. Not even to mention the much longer-term, far-off reality of the future governance of Gaza and what happens to the Palestinian Authority. Will it have buy-in into this process? All of these questions are a mountain of issues to resolve. They're not just minor details that, well, we have phase one, the hostages have been released, you have a ceasefire that seems to be holding for now. The rest is just sort of, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Anything but, Gavin. This is the baby steps, the very beginning of a process. But Donald Trump's rhetoric, and that's what's remarkable, and the leaders themselves say it, they're all trying to say the momentum is there, and it's almost as if by saying the momentum is there, by repeating Donald Trump's words, if you keep repeating it, the force of repetition might make something happen. It lends a dynamic of its own,
to which, as many European leaders have said, and some in the Middle East, credit where credit's due in the fact that by using that rhetoric, you've boxed in constantly, playing and negotiating. Nuria Tessin is also with us by phone, our Egypt correspondent. Great to have you back with us, Nuria. Very interesting to hear Egypt's role in this, because President Trump kind of talks about how the importance of Qatar, Egypt, Turkey in getting Hamas to the table. We just heard here from that mini press conference between the two of them, a quote from President Trump. President Sissi, he said, played a very important role. I appreciate him. I appreciate what Egypt's done very much. What does he mean? What do you see, Nuri, as Egypt's role here?
Well, we shouldn't forget that a few years ago, Donald Trump called Sissi his favorite dictator, which means that they have been quite close in terms of the way they approach us in the region. But it's true that since the beginning of this new term of Donald Trump presidency, it's been a little bit more difficult to make approaches between the two of them due to the situation in the Gaza Strip. But nevertheless, it has been always a strong ally of the